Welcome to Peace is Possible, presented by Veterans for Peace. I'm Matt Southworth, and I will be talking today about my journey from a military soldier serving in the Army to a peace advocate. My journey actually started in high school, like many military people's journeys do. I wanted to go to college. I was living in Ocala, Florida at the time. I was born in upstate New York, but my family moved there when I was 11. And I really saw my future as, an open book. My two best friends were joining the military at the time, and they convinced me to go talk to the recruiter because of the military college benefits. It was at that time that 9/11 happened. September 11th, 2001. And like so many others, I was confused and enraged by the events of 9/11. And I, like so many others, wanted vengeance on those who perpetrated it. And it was at that time that I decided to join the Army. My two best friends and I were joining together, and we were all supposed to go to Hawaii. Long story short, they went to Hawaii, and I went to Seattle, Washington, which is no Hawaii, though it is very beautiful. I was stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State, and it was from there that I deployed to Iraq in 2004. When I joined the Army, I couldn't have found Iraq on a blank map of the world if you asked me to. I was very ignorant about U.S. foreign policy. I was ignorant about our involvement in the Middle East. I knew very little about all of that. I believe partly as a product of my public school education and what was omitted from our history and government classes and world history classes. But upon joining the military as an intelligence analyst and deploying to Iraq in 2004, I was greeted with the stark reality of the truth. Now, you may remember in 2002 and 2003, the drumbeats of war and the talk of weapons of mass destruction and Saddam's smoking gun, yellow cake uranium, and all the rest. Colin Powell testifying before the United Nations with little vials of anthrax and nerve agents and things like that, making the case that Iraq was a threat to the U.S. and to the world. We know now that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. We know now that pre-existing al-Qaeda ties between Saddam and al-Qaeda did not exist. We know now that the war in Iraq served little purpose for improving the lives of Iraqis or for the U.S. So it's natural to question, what was that all about? I'll tell you a little bit about my experience in Iraq. I mainly did high-value target acquisition, HVT work in Iraq. I worked in a small unit, 114 Cav, which was a part of 2nd Infantry Division. We were in northern Iraq, Mosul, Tal Afar area. Tal Afar was around 60 air miles to the west of Mosul. And we were near the Syrian border as well as the Turkish border and the Iranian border in northern Iraq. And when we first started, when I was first deployed, our mission was to transfer the authority from U.S. military to the Iraqi government, which was being formulated. After our invasion in March of 2003, we disbanded the Ba'ath Party and the Saddam government. We disbanded all the various agencies of government that operated in Iraq under Saddam, and we started to build a new government. And our whole mission was to transfer authority from us to them. But the reality of war is that when you occupy a country and a people, they don't take too kindly to your presence, especially when your occupation is rather aggressive and punitive and causing the deaths of innocent people, of their citizens. So we began, sort of before I even got there, a program called the Cash for Weapons program. And the Cash for Weapons program was an attempt to get weapons off of the streets of Iraq so they couldn't be used against our occupying force. There came a time that we realized that a lot of the weapons that were being used against us were actually being smuggled in. And the Cash for Weapons program actually, rather than reduce the number of weapons, was increasing the number of weapons coming into Iraq, because it was a way to get American dollars. And at the point in time that we decided to stop the Cash for Weapons program, stop paying for the mortars and the AK-47s and the various other things that we were collecting, those weapons started to be used against us. So in 2004, there was a rapid increase in improvised explosive devices, IEDs. I lost friends in convoys to IEDs in Iraq in 2004. And that whole process of becoming a target of the Iraqis rather than being greeted as their liberators, as Donald Rumsfeld had promised, radicalized a lot of us in the military. And we started to begin to wonder, there's definitely, by the way, a split between the older, longer serving members in the Army and people like me who had just joined, in terms of our willingness to question the mission and question what was going on. But as we began to as we began to experience more and more casualties, more and more IEDs, more and more ambushes and sniper attacks, our behavior got more and more aggressive. And we began to conduct what we called night raids, which was a process of using intelligence gathered through closed source and open source methods, informants, interrogations, things like that, as well as communications, what we call signal intelligence, SIGINT. And we would decide, based on the intelligence, where we should raid, whose houses we should break into. On these raids, we would break into people's houses in the middle of the night. We would separate the men and women. And of course, when you break into someone's home in the middle of the night and you are in your full, what we called our full battle rattle, the full military gear, you recognize it now because our police wear it on the streets of America. Flak vests, Kevlar helmets, in our case, M4 rifles. When you break into someone's home dressed like that, it's obviously terrifying. So there would be screaming and crying. Sometimes little kids would soil themselves. We would separate the men and the women, and we would take all the men of fighting age, which for us could have been as young as 10 and as old as 70. I've seen that age stratification. And we would drag these people out to our forward operating base. And on our forward operating base, we had a detainee holding area. There was a slab of concrete where people would be brought out and lined up. They were, their heads were covered with a sandbag, an empty sandbag. And one at a time, these people would be processed. They would be strip searched. It was often the case that they would urinate or defecate on themselves. So we would hose them off and we'd put them in an orange jumpsuit. And once they were in the jumpsuit, they were brought into the detainee holding area, which was a building probably 30 feet by 30 feet with 4 glass walls and a shingle roof. It was surrounded by about a 15-foot high berm all the way around. There were 3 observation points that were high, which had at least one soldier pointing their weapon down at all times. And there was one observation point, which was ground level, and that was the entry and exit point where I spent my time when we had detainees. What I observed as we began to bring these people in and interrogate them, what I observed was that they often were just, they had no true intelligence value. And it's an important note to make because as an intel person, we only cared about someone's intelligence value. We had effectively already written off their human value because in war, the first casualty is truth, but the second is human dignity. And as we interrogated and processed them, we determined whether or not they had intelligence value, and then we sent them higher. And higher for us was to brigade command or beyond, possibly Abu Ghraib, possibly secret CIA prisons, which have now been exposed for many years, but were not known at the time. And it just occurred to me over time, watching this time and time again, as I looked in the eyes of the 19-year-old kids, and I was a 19-year-old kid myself, that I wouldn't be really doing anything differently from what these people were doing, resisting their oppression, resisting the occupation of American forces. We had promised freedom and democracy, and under the guise of freedom and democracy, we brought a system of oppression and death to their doorstep. No one accepts this. No one. No one accepts the boot on their neck without a fight. I should say at least very few people would. So it's not a surprise to me that Iraq had a growing and vibrant insurgency over the years since the end of my deployment in July of 2004. We continued to occupy Iraq until 2011. The only reason U.S. forces left Iraq initially was because the Status of Forces Agreement that was signed by President Bush in approximately 2008 had expired in 2011, and the Iraqis refused to grant immunity to our troops to continue their occupation in the country. We all know that the rise of ISIS in around 2014, 2012 to 14 probably, caused U.S. troops to re-engage, particularly in northern Iraq. We still maintain a green zone, as well as many other sort of obscure outposts, bases in Iraq to this day, though there is not a large military presence. So we have to ask ourselves, what did we really get for the Iraq War? As the public, we got a lot of debt. We lost thousands of soldiers. We have many other thousands who are devastated and have had their lives ruined by post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental issues associated with their military service. There is an opportunity cost as well in terms of the quality of life in this country for every citizen. When we're spending $4 to $6 trillion on war over a decade, that's $4 to $6 trillion that's leaving the country, or if it's not leaving the country, it's going into the pockets of our defense contractors. And they are the ones who are profiting and benefiting. In fact, just to name one, Kellogg Brown and Root, which was a subsidiary of Halliburton, who famously was run at a time by Dick Cheney, our vice president at the time of the Iraq War. Kellogg Brown and Root operated on my forward operating base, where they maintained the porta potties, the dining facilities, and some other things as well, including laundry. Kellogg Brown and Root made approximately $30+ billion in profit, not revenue, but profit during the Iraq War. A number of these companies, a number of these defense contractors benefited greatly due to our occupation and murder of Iraqis. What did we lose as a country? I think we lost touch with trust in the government in a really profound way. In addition to the war in Iraq, of course, we had the 20-year-long war in Afghanistan, which happened simultaneous to the war in Iraq and escalated greatly starting in 2009 as we began to exit from Iraq. Then the war in Afghanistan had a long-term devastating effect in terms of the availability of heroin in this country. Now, was the heroin on American streets always Afghan heroin? Was it derived from Afghan poppy? Probably not always, but it increased the global supply. And we have a crisis of opiate use in this country that continues to this day. This has actually touched my family personally. I have 2 children. They're 14 and 16. They are my nieces. I am raising them because my brother was a heroin addict who passed away just last year in 2023. Their mother was a heroin addict as well. She passed away in 2018. And we are raising 2 children who have a lot of difficulty due to the fact that their parents were not in their lives. That is just one story among millions. Among millions. And these 2 things are directly correlated. The hopelessness, the sense of distrust we all have and feel right now draws right back to being lied to about the Iraq War, among other things. And I don't want to give you the impression that this is a recent phenomenon. The reality is, and I've spent a considerable amount of time over the last 20 years studying these issues, the reality is that this is a long-standing way of operating for our government. And when I say our government, it's a broad, encompassing term for 2 million people who, some of whom do incredible, important work on behalf of the American people. What I really mean is the small, possibly clandestine, little-known groups that exist, the cabals that exist within our government, who orchestrate and pull strings. Now, that might sound a little conspiratorial, but forgive me for feeling a little conspiratorial after having been lied into the Iraq War by the government very explicitly. There's a book I would direct your attention to called The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot. This book details the history of the CIA and in particular Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was one of many operators at the end of World War II that helped to create the imperial America we know today. And its fingerprints are everywhere. You look at the U.S.-Iran relations, for example, you can draw a direct line to the U.S. and Iran's relations today, all the way back to 1953 and the overthrow of the elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. This was called Operation Ajax, and it was a joint intelligence operation between the British MI6 and American intelligence, the CIA, to organize a coup against Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. And you might ask yourself, why would we want to do that? What interest would we have? Well, it's really simple. Mossadegh ran on a platform of nationalizing Iranian oil, which at that point was under the control of British Petroleum and ostensibly the British government. Many coups have followed. That was just one of the first. Of course, there's Argentina in 1973, and the installation of Pinochet, and the Iranian coup and the reintroduction of the Shah of Iran, for example, lasted until 1979 in the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution, which saw the taking of hostages in 1979 through 1980, had a profound effect, chilling effect, on American relations between Iran. And, for whatever the Iranian government's positions are, the Iranian people are largely pro-Western. So the impetus for all of this really comes down to the control of key vital resources, oil being among the top. And you ask yourself maybe why that is. It's not for our cars and it's not for our homes. That's not really what's driving the policy. What's driving the policy is a strategic military advantage. As long as the so-called national defense of the United States of America is reliant on a heavily mechanized military, wherein tanks and fighter jets and other personnel carrying vehicles, battleships, and all the rest, they don't get gallons per mile. Or miles per gallon. They get gallons per mile. And what that functionally means is the U.S., to maintain its global hegemony through force and through military might, has to control the flow of oil. There's a deep history here, and it's interlinked with other key allies across Europe and the Middle East. We see these big power games sort of playing out. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline and its destruction as one example. The Nord Stream pipeline was carrying oil, crude oil and natural gas from Russia to Europe, according to Seymour Hersh. It was blown up either by the U.S. or our proxies. And really, again, what this comes down to is making sure there is hegemony, U.S. hegemony, on oil. And again, it comes down to the supremacy of our military. And to really draw the lesson there, you have to go back to World War II and the fact that the Third Reich, Hitler's army, which was also heavily mechanized, lost for a lot of reasons, but one of the main ones was that they had no logistic lines for oil to feed their heavily mechanized military. I believe that's where this group that sort of is obsessed with these kind of strategies really draws their inspiration. So let me bring that to the present and just put a finer point on some of the things that the clandestine state does in our name against our interest. In 1975 through 76, the U.S. Congress, in response to the Kennedy assassination, some 10 years after the fact, formed a committee in short term known as the Church Committee, but it was a committee to investigate clandestine action and in covert assassinations around the world. And the Church Committee was the only thing of its kind then, to that point and since, that exposed some of the inner workings of the U.S. government and some of the more nefarious things we have been through and done. Just to name a few exposed by the Church Committee, there was MK Ultra, which had to do with mind control and attempting to use mind control to control people. That's a deep, deep rabbit hole. I recommend reading the book Chaos if you want to know more. There was COINTELPRO, which was all about the infiltration. This is mainly the FBI in this case, but mainly it was about the infiltration of peace groups who were calling for an end to the war in Vietnam, among other wars. There's Operation Mockingbird, which had to do with the CIA planting certain positive stories that sort of painted the American imperial empire in a positive light. Operation Shamrock, which was involved the NSA spying on American citizens. That's not a new phenomenon either. There was infamously Operation Paperclip, which was exposed a little earlier than the Church Committee, but that had to do with us bringing assets from Germany after World War II to the U.S., probably the most famous of which was Wernher von Braun, who was a Nazi rocket scientist who became the first director of NASA. And probably most infamously, perhaps, was Operation Northwoods, which was created by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and involved plots to basically overthrow Castro in Cuba. The CIA, the Joint Chiefs, and other clandestine groups had worked for decades throughout the 50s and 60s to overthrow Castro, and Operation Northwoods was just one component of that. Now, you may be thinking that all happened a long time ago. Maybe it's old news. It's history we don't have to worry about. I would draw your attention to a recent story that came out about the Pentagon's program to create anti-vaccine sentiment against the Chinese vaccine being sold in the Philippines. That's a psychological operation that happened in modern times against public health in order to blacken the eye of an adversary in China. So these things are still happening to this day. Now, why does this matter? Why does any of this matter? How does it connect to your life, your everyday? Simply put, there's an opportunity cost to maintaining the empire. We know we desperately need universal health care or some type of improved healthcare system in this country. We desperately need to upgrade our infrastructure to improve and enhance our schools, our communities, so many things here domestically. And every penny that we spend abroad, every penny that goes to our military contractors, to quote Dwight Eisenhower in his Chance for Peace speech, to paraphrase him, is a theft in the final sense from those who hunger and are not fed, and from those who are cold and are not clothed. Dwight Eisenhower, one of our only five-star generals in the history of this country, and the credited leader who saw U.S. forces through their successful campaign in World War II, he understood the cost of war. And he tried to warn us again in his exit speech when he coined the phrase the military-industrial complex. It's the military-industrial complex and its tentacles within oil and other nefarious things that really, to maintain it, is to undermine our society and the thriving of our people. And that's why it matters. Take any issue, let's say climate change. If you care about climate change, you notice the planet is warming, you're seeing it in your own backyard, as I am, as a gardener, you know that there are things happening that could be really detrimental in the long run to us all. As long as we are maintaining this empire, which can only thrive by burning enormous amounts of hydrocarbons and creating greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we will not be able to escape the effects of climate change. Because of this opportunity cost, we will not be able to build a society where every person has an opportunity to thrive and live a full and meaningful life. It is an existential cost. It is an existential cost to maintaining the empire through military force. So what I would call for, and what Veterans for Peace calls for, is a disarming, not unilateral, but a global disarming of our entire species. This is an idea whose time may not have come yet, because I think, and many would agree, we are a very immature species on this planet. But there will come a day where it is no longer acceptable to kill each other for profit. Just like the day came that it was no longer acceptable to enslave one another for profit in this country, and we ended slavery in the transatlantic slave trade. Some might say, but yeah, of course it would be good if we didn't have war, but what about all the jobs that the war creates? Well, you should know that every dollar we spend in the military-industrial complex creates far fewer jobs than dollars we would spend in public education or public transit or any other way. So don't be fooled by the idea that we can't live in a better world. There are really only 3 levers of power that exist in this country. One is the vote, and it's the weakest because we give away all of our leverage before the person we're voting for takes power. The next is labor, and the last is consumption. So choose wisely. Join a union, and do your best to refuse to participate in the global empire for American dominance. Your life, my life, the life of our children truly depends on it. Thank you.